You're listening to episode 78 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Jason Siff speaks with us about unlearning meditation in the first of a two-part episode. We come from a long line of meditators. For literally thousands of years, there have been specific instructions on how to do this practice and what the outcomes will inevitably be. And we have very positive experiences to validate those notions, those planted seeds of what will happen. But it doesn't always necessarily work the same way for all meditators. Logistically, there's a bit of a problem handing down throughout the centuries meditation instructions that cover all possible varieties of human experience. It's one of the many reasons we rely on teachers and our fellow meditators to provide some guidance in what we do with some of the roadblocks we may run into in our practice. The simple fact is, one size does not fit all. One size fits one. Each of us not only has a unique personal history, but biology as well. All of the processes that make up us also lead to variety in the personal experience of meditation, and sometimes exploring that variation, rather than dogmatic adherence to traditional method, may help our practice. Jason Siff was a Buddhist monk in Sri Lanka in the late 1980s, where he began studying Pali and teaching meditation. After he left the Buddhist monastic order and returned to Los Angeles in 1990, he studied counseling psychology and worked as an intern for 4 years, at the end of which he decided to devote his life to meditation teaching instead of practicing psychotherapy. He co-founded the Skillful Meditation Project around that time and began teaching meditation as his primary occupation, further developing his own approach to awareness meditation practice, which is called recollective awareness. Since then, he has been invited to teach by several lay Buddhist sanghas in America, Canada, and Australia. He has also taught at the Esalen Institute and the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice herbal mint tea. And our guest today is Jason Siff. Jason, thanks for being here.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
So today we'll be talking about Jason's book, Unlearning Meditation, What We Do When the Instructions Get in the Way. And I've got to say, I just was looking at this book over the past week and just finished it up. And it seems to be very counterintuitive to people who may have been raised in a very traditional way of learning meditation. And we'll get to that point. What I'd like to do is just ask Jason some basic information about your background and what led you to writing the book.
One thing that I found in teaching meditation, and I've been teaching meditation for over 20 years, was that many of the instructions that people got as traditional instructions, such as bring your attention back to the breath whenever your mind wanders, would have an effect of making people a bit tight around meditation, that there was more of a sense of them feeling that they had to do that correctly, that there was a kind of force or driven quality to the way that they were meditating, and that seemed to get in the way of people just sitting with their experience, just becoming more open to whatever would be going on within their minds in meditation. And so, what I saw in my own meditation practice, when I was a monk in Sri Lanka, I was a monk for 3 years, and during that period of time, I first started with the Mahasi method and was trained in it and trained to teach it. That after a while, I needed to really let my experience unfold more naturally. That it just seemed that the direction was not to continually try to note my experience, but try to become just more open and aware of what was going on. And as I continued to meditate and teach meditation, I found that for one to develop a more open meditation practice is it's really not so easy. It's actually quite a bit harder in many respects than sitting down and doing a particular set of instructions. And so one of the main things that I found is when I would teach and listen to people's reports of sittings, that so many things were going on in people's meditation sittings that they never talked about to another person, that their teachers never knew about, that they really hadn't acknowledged to themselves as part of their meditation experience. And I saw that was going on in my sitting too, that as I became more open and allowing around my thoughts and feelings, and let myself drift and go into various other states of consciousness while I was sitting, that there were experiences that I believe they fit into the Buddhist teaching. They fit into the Pali Canon, that you can find references to people working with their thoughts and feelings and other states of mind, but they weren't necessarily talked about. There wasn't a kind of language around it that I thought was really working. And so what tended to happen is I would hear people's sittings and ask them to talk about their experiences in their own words, and I too was writing down my meditation experiences, and found that whole process was just enabling a greater awareness of what was going on inside meditation. And it seemed to me like a whole new frontier, that when you have just a set of labels for your experience, I don't think you really are motivated to go beyond the labels and to look underneath and to look further into what's happening when you meditate. So this approach was kind of born out of my own, experience of letting my meditation process kind of unfold more naturally, becoming more curious and interested in it, and writing it down and talking about these experiences with other people. And in talking about experiences, it wasn't about finding out what experience meant or where it fit within a hierarchy of experiences or a particular system. It was more or less, how do you actually describe what's going on inside of you in meditation? Do we really have the language for it? And what I've found over the years in teaching people in this way of meditating is that there are different ways of talking about experience than we're taught, and that language, the way we talk about our meditation experiences, does have a great effect on what we're aware of when we meditate and how we do meditate. So that's an important feature of the book as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you notice that there's something that I want to read a quote from the book, that if you do have the book and you're listening, it's on page 103. You were reading a famous passage in the Lankavatara Sutta, Mahayana text. And yes, you were saying that from the day of the Buddha's awakening to his final entering into Nibbana, he did not proclaim a doctrine. And you said that this reverberated within your consciousness for days. It made sense. The Buddha didn't teach a doctrine. He taught what he experienced as a way for his mind to find peace and not get caught up in producing more pain for himself and others. And that was a transformative moment for you, it seems like.
Yes, and like any such moments, it was building for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And that I mean, there are other particular suttas that also affected me greatly in the Pali Canon. I just didn't mention those in the book. But the basic tendency, or the basic direction that I was going in was considering that our various concepts and ideas about experience, just already having the roadmap and already having the language for experience gets in the way of our just sitting with what we're experiencing. And so, I mean, basically this is something that I think we know. Most meditators have some sense that coming to some real quick conclusion as to what an experience is, or just slapping a word onto particular states of mind without really looking any further doesn't necessarily help us really explore, go into those experiences. But in a sense, when we do that, we may feel like we're meditating in accordance with the tradition. That's one of the time-honored, practices we might say around Buddhism, is that people use the similar concepts and words to talk about things. So what I found at that point in my practice was that if I could just put my learning and my understanding of Buddhism a bit aside and just kind of approach it from a fresh perspective, maybe I would start to see that this whole project wasn't about getting the Dharma terms to fit my experience, but actually looking into my experience to see how the Dharma actually fits.
Right. And that's a very important distinction, because I see that a lot of techniques, we'll say, for want of a better word, techniques, and I don't mean this in a dismissive way, because they can be very helpful to some people, may in fact be impeding progress in their meditation. So, for example, I have always struggled a bit with labeling. That a thought arises, and thought or feeling, and I label it, and it's always seemed to me like a tag and release. And I have this, I'm practicing having and building an aversion to thoughts rather than simply allowing them to come up and noticing them and allowing them to go where they will. And it seems that what you're describing in the book is it's okay to have those come up, that you don't have to dismiss them. You don't have to follow the set roadmap of get your mind on breath. It's bad if you follow the thoughts. Get your mind on breath. It's bad if you... We don't have to think that way.
Oh, yes, we don't. And that's why, essentially the approach to meditation that I'm teaching and advocating is one where the main focus is how do you become aware of your thoughts. And so the example you just brought up of labeling your thoughts as soon as they come up, to me that's a way of distancing yourself from the thoughts, from actually putting one thought on top of another. The label is just a new thought that you're having about the thought you just had. And
right.
What you then end up believing is that the label is a more accurate or truthful, representation of the experience and the thought that you experienced. And labeling and meditating around thinking in this way also tends to produce in people a sense of there being some kind of observer who's not affected by the thoughts, or some optimal state where one is just observing the thoughts and they're just going by and there isn't a real kind of effect, that one is equanimous with them. And yes, that may happen for a little while in certain states of mind, but much of our experience is that we are drawn into thoughts and that we are the ones who are thinking them, that there's a very strong subjective experience of thinking. And so, this is actually the hardest part of my development in this approach of teaching it and really talking to people about it, is that in order to know thinking, we actually have to let thinking go on. And if we're going to let thinking go on, the question becomes, how do we then become aware of thinking? And you basically have to say, well, I'm not going to become aware of thinking so much in the present moment, because at that time I'm thinking and I'm engrossed in the thoughts. I'll probably start to develop thinking a bit after I've actually thought the thought. And that's, I believe, the way in which we do develop awareness of our thinking, that it's a recollective awareness. We've thought about something and we pick up, I've been thinking about this, or I now notice what I've been thinking about. Not, I'm thinking about this and I notice it immediately. It's that type of attempt to notice something immediately that will cut thinking and interrupt it and make it very hard for you to really get a sense of the dynamic nature of your thoughts, of how your thoughts really are driven, how they keep going. And much of our thinking, when you look at it, is actually, it has a direction it's going in. It has a trajectory. It's not just that we're going to pick up the first moment the thought crosses our mind, what it's about, or what is really holding us, what we're really, what's compelling about the thought. We may have to let ourselves think about it to get to know some of its features and reflect back on that experience to get to really see into the nature of the thinking.
Mm-hmm. And that's key, because what you've been describing is and you make reference to this in the book, recollective awareness meditation. And you say it at one point that really these thoughts are rising from causes and conditions, and that if we just dismiss them, we're not investigating critically what are those causes and conditions. Why did these thoughts arise? Is there a tightness in my mind, in my thinking, that led to this particular thought? And I think that may be, and help me understand, is you do describe journaling as a large part of this, and you use it throughout the book, I think, very effectively in showing a progress with some of the students. Tell us some about journaling and why you have students do that.
Say the meditation practice itself is one that's very open, very loose. It's just sitting with whatever comes up. And so in order for us to sit with that, minimal amount of structure, what we're going to find is that we're going to go into many different places during the meditation sitting. It's not going to have the same kind of sense of task. It's not going to seem all that linear. It's going to have we're going to be going all over the place, basically. And many people who've been taught to meditate have probably been told that that's not a good thing to do. But what I found is that by allowing yourself to go into your thoughts and feelings, much of the fuel, what keeps the feelings and the thoughts alive, actually may diminish, that there's less conflict with your inner experiences, less trying to change it or make something happen, or really to have your meditation go in a particular direction. You find that you're starting to see it goes into a variety of different directions. But if you try to become too mindful, you try to, in a sense, notice wherever you go while it's happening, you're actually going to start steering and directing your experience. So the journaling afterwards is actually at first a way for you to be comfortable sitting with your mind going all over the place and not having much control over it during the meditation sitting, and becoming aware of it after the fact and getting to know through the journaling just a bit of what areas you might focus on, what kind of themes may come up, how your sitting began, how there were certain transitions through the sitting. You might just start to pick up that there's certain things going on in your meditation sitting that you can write about after the sitting. And part of the writing then is that you're going to use your own words instead of putting things into Buddhist terminology or particular language that you think is the appropriate language for talking about your experience, which is just a more, stepping back kind of language of, maybe more clinical or more safer. You might find that you start describing things more personally as what you were actually thinking about, what you were feeling, and that you went through some certain things during that meditation sitting. And you might find that in doing that, after the sitting, you're actually exploring it a bit. You're looking into your experiences while you're trying to find words for it, while you're writing about it, you're reflecting on your experience. So the journaling is a way of developing awareness and discernment of what happened in your meditation sitting. And I find it's a much more, how do you say, the way of writing will be a bit more like you would be writing a letter to somebody or talking to somebody about your experience. It takes away that kind of sense of around looking at your experience as if you really should know it all and have a real good grasp of it. It is able to bring up a bit more that there's things that you are confused about or that you're concerned about or afraid of, or so a variety of things start to enter into your journal about what's going on in your meditation sittings that may never come up in an interview with a teacher.
Right, where you have only, perhaps a 10 to 15 minute chunk of time on a retreat because everyone gets their amount of time with a teacher, and you want to, you have that subtle push to be a good Buddhist and be a good meditator and talk to the teacher about things that are that you're struggling with in the right kinds of terms and all that, instead of a journal, which is, as you're saying, a very personal thing, and you're able to write down what is perhaps a bit more nakedly honest with yourself about what's happening in your meditation. That was one of the things that impressed me most in some of the passages that you have from sample journals, is people were writing about the same experiences that many, if not all of us, have in our meditations, of not just the pain put up, mind back on the points of contact. That's certainly there as well. But it's also the thoughts that arose, and what you've done in this is give people the okay. It's all right to follow those, and you'd see progress in understanding where they were coming from. And that was one of the advantages, it seemed, in sending the books to you, the journals to you, is that you could take a look at this and see patterns that in writing our own journals maybe we couldn't. Is that something that happens with some frequency when you get sent a journal by a student?
Yes, quite a bit. We're in writing down our experience. We're going to focus on certain areas that we're used to talking about. And what happens when I get a journal from somebody is that I'll read it and think about it, probably read it again, and then have a phone call. And in that half-hour conversation, we would go into a variety of things that are in the journal, but also may have not gotten in there, that are a bit on the periphery of one's awareness, certain parts of experience that you may not talk about or even know how to talk about. Because some people can be very fluent, say, with their feelings, but may not be all that fluent with certain sensations. Or some people may not be able to really go into certain kinds of fantasies and imaginary scenarios that they have, while others may find that that's something they can do quite readily. So there's in the interviews, quite a bit will open up from having read the journal. But the journal is an important document. It's basically what it is that you remember and what, in a sense, you normally will look at within your experience, what you are aware of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Tell us a bit about. We'll get to a section where you're very specific about this being a problem that we run into, and that's impasses and transformative conceptualization. Tell us about that, because I also found that to be very helpful, because many of us reach a point where we get stuck in our practice, and this can help with that.
Okay. what I've said to students over the years is that I believe that practically any meditation instruction we get, even the ones I give, will lead us to an impasse. That the outcome of following any instruction is that we probably will get stuck. I have yet to hear of somebody who's been doing the same practice year in, year out that hasn't, in a sense, felt incredibly stuck.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if you go to a teacher and the response is just keep doing the same practice harder or more often or the more greater diligence or faith, you won't be stuck anymore, then I think that's not really listening to the fact that the person has reached an impasse. That
it's like being stuck in the mud, and the advice you're getting is just give it more gas. You'll get out eventually.
Right. And we know in a sense that's not going to work, but it sounds plausible, so maybe we try it and find again that maybe what's keeping us stuck is something that we're not seeing about how we're actually doing that practice. And one of the main areas I think around getting stuck for people, especially at the beginning of their meditation practice, is the whole notion of doing it correctly.
Yeah. Yes.
And which is one reason when I give instructions, I'll tell people there's really no way to do this wrong. Just to try to take out that notion that there's a correct way and there's an incorrect way, and that because what then happens is that we will go into a self-critical mode or self-conscious mode, and we will judge our performance, and we'll be looking at meditation often as something that we're supposed to be doing in a certain way, that we have the right idea of how it should be done, but somehow in actual practice we're not meeting it. We're failing in some way. So for quite a few meditators who get caught in that, they'll feel a bit, incompetent or incapable of meditating, when maybe something else is going on here. That they're just been given this notion that they're really holding on to, that there's a correct way of doing it, and that some people are getting it and some people aren't, and that there's the right way of being with the breath that somebody knows, and probably the teacher and everybody else, should be able to get that. But the case may actually be is that there's just your way of being with the breath. That's all you're going to find.
Yeah, you say that beautifully. I'm going to read another quote, and I'm going to go on for a few sentences because this whole section you get in some very important parts. On page 100 for people who want to play along. We may be living with a rather simple narrative that we should believe everything about the teachings we are practicing and not to question them, since they come from someone wiser and more spiritually developed than we are. But that view leads to dependence on the teacher or his or her tradition, and does not usually allow us to have critical thoughts about the practices we're doing and the teaching we're receiving. And skipping ahead a little bit, if only more teachers of meditation could accept the role of doubt, confusion, and critical thinking play in a meditator's development of independence and autonomy, they could perhaps support it as something healthy for the individual instead of seeing it as rejection of their teachings or betrayal of their trust. Really, we need to be able to question with confidence, and part of that questioning, and even in the instruction that may not be working for us, if we're stuck in the mud, then changing things might be the right thing to do. And what you're saying with this is that it's okay to change things. It's okay to look at things differently. It's okay to examine them in ways that the tradition teaching we've been given may not always address.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that's the other side of being in an impasse, is that actually maybe some respects an impasse is a good thing because it gives you an opportunity to sit with being stuck and to get a sense of what it's really like being stuck. And that's why I appreciate your bringing up the quote around confusion and doubt, is that if we have a meditation practice where we're supposed to start with strong conviction that this practice is the right way, and
right.
and that's going to lead to the promises that are presented around it, if I only do it correctly, then basically we're not given the freedom to doubt. We're not given something that we can actually sit with that's saying basically, I don't know if this is true until it really happens. I don't really, I can't really say it for sure. And I think what happens is that we do need some kind of faith that the instructions or teachings we're receiving around meditation, have value, that they are good. But we don't necessarily need to believe that they're the only ones.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've gotten into many discussions over the years with people who are very interested in supporting the doctrine and the teaching as it is written down. And although that's fine, that works quite well for many people, some of us do get stuck in the mud. And where we run into problems with our practice is that we hear, if we do this practice right, this will inevitably lead to perfect enlightenment. Which I always struggle a bit with that, because first off, we don't have a real clear definition of what we mean by that and how we can show it and how one knows we're there. And of the, 360 million Buddhists in the world, how many fully enlightened beings can we point to clearly without a doubt and say, this person is fully enlightened? I have problems with that kind of setting of a goal, and it may be that works quite well, and that can help encourage our practice. But for some of us, it puts us back in the truck and we're stuck in the mud. We need to be able to question and try other things.
Yes. I think, I have met many meditators over the years who've stuck with a particular practice because of the promise of it, not because of what they've noticed as its benefits for them personally. And to me, that's actually a very sad story for somebody to, in a sense, stay with something that's really supposed to help in development of certain qualities and awareness and clarity, and it's not doing that, and then they feel it's their mistake. The thing is that really to consider that perhaps the whole notion of giving somebody a promise around a meditation practice may actually put them into a position where they're now going to start to assess themselves quite a bit and be on themselves about how they're meditating and how often they're meditating and how many retreats they're doing and all these things. And when I teach, I basically don't give any promises. What I do instead, which is part of this whole notion of recollection, is that I encourage students to reflect back on their actual experiences of meditation, what meditation's actually been doing for them, and to see if it's been positive and certain qualities have developed, then they could trust it a bit more.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with recognizing the things that you can point to that may not be the very high and lofty and laudable ideal of a full enlightenment, whatever that is, but look at, are you interacting with more awareness, with more compassion, with people around you? Well, yeah, I am, but I'm not fully enlightened yet, and that's a problem. Well, hang on. There are positive transformation. There are positive things that are happening here. That's okay too. When you're hiking up a mountain, every now and then, stop for a minute, take a breath, take a look back at the good, wonderful views you've got of the progress that you've made and the things that have happened. I do want to ask, I'm kind of wrap it up. I know we want to stick to an amount of time on this episode. I did want to chat with you about, for a moment, in transformative conceptualization, you list 3 basic steps. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about each one. There's naming an experience, describing that named experience, and then seeing into the narrative of that experience. Tell us a little about that, because that was very interesting to me.
This theory of transformative conceptualization is something that I started developing over a decade ago, and it was really meant to address some of the questions around people having experiences of deep realization or enlightenment, and and also just the way people will tend to label their ordinary experiences. So it's a theory that kind of covers just how we conceptualize our experience. And the first way that we conceptualize our experience usually seems to be by naming it, that making it somehow explicit and knowing that this is what it is. So I believe what often happens when people look at, say, an enlightenment experience is that they've read a description or heard a description of what it is, and so they have a concept of it, an idea of it, meditate or do particular practices, and then have a particular experience, and then it's named. You know, that experience itself now has, in a sense, filled out the concept. And so what I see happening is that if people stay at that place around those kinds of experiences, they will probably change. That there's a change perhaps in how they'll look at themselves or other people, or how they'll understand the teachings they've received. But they're not necessarily going to understand the experience they had. Instead, the experience they had, an experience of maybe feeling very blissful or light, or their mind being very clear and open, or spacious, any kind of experience that may be considered an optimal experience, once it gets named, it becomes now, this is what enlightenment is. And then it becomes part of one's, perhaps, or it becomes a special experience that one may refer back to or look at different times. But do you actually then go another step further and try to describe it and try to go into a lot of detail? And in the description of it, you'll find that it can't fit into the name. You know, it doesn't, the naming, that labeling starts to, in a sense, not work so well, because it's your experience. It has its own kind of texture, its own feel to it, its own particular subjective quality to it. And in doing that, and going to description, I believe what happens is that we may be able to actually get a deeper understanding of what these experiences are like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that would be also part of something that would happen with somebody journaling and interviewing with a teacher, that they would start to get into a bit more detail and I think a more honest description of what happened that wouldn't relate back to some tradition. And then a third step is basically that what happens is that this description is one thing, you know, but you've already developed a narrative. You already have, if you've had a particular special experience in your life, you already have some story about that yourself and that experience and what it means, and there's so many things about it. So it's not just about enlightenment or waking up or realizing or experiencing transcendence or oneness or anything like that. It also has this kind of story that's kept going, and that's the hardest thing for us to look at, because we've already made something of ourselves around that story.
Mm-hmm. We're identifying very strongly with that narrative.
With that narrative, yes. And so looking into a narrative that you've identified with strongly, especially a very positive one, may, I don't know, just maybe something that you really don't want to do unless you realize or start to understand that if you don't look at that narrative, you may not really be, in a sense, really in touch with where you are, with certain things about yourself that others are seeing, or that really haven't changed because of the experience that you've had. I've met many people who can't look into the narratives around their teachers, and I really understand that. I really respect that. That maybe you don't want to go there. You don't want to question, your teacher's attainments or abilities or knowledge or anything like that. But you may find that you're doing it anyhow, at certain times, and that it may be better to have a relationship with a teacher where you're actually able to talk about the miscommunication, the misunderstandings, and the flaws and things that are going on in the relationship, and to have something which is just not idealizing the teacher.
Right. Understanding that a teacher is a person too, that they are also practitioners, and they have some of the same foibles that the rest of us do. And when we have the teacher up on a pedestal, that's when either we're going to turn away from evidence to the contrary, perhaps to our detriment, perhaps to our harm. But it isn't really fair to the teacher. It's not allowing them to be a person, a human being.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. Teachers may actually labor under this sense of who they are to their students, and the kind of model they are and the kind of person they are, and that's a very tough responsibility to carry. And the way I teach, the way I work with people, at least I hope that for many of my students that we talk about our relationship, that we talk about things I've said and done that they haven't felt all that comfortable with, that I talk to them honestly about some of the ways they're seeing me and what they're expecting from me, and that those dialogues over the years I've found incredibly healthy.
Yeah. And it's nice to know that there are teachers who acknowledge being human. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Well, we've gone through, your book is written in 4 parts, and we've really covered on a high level unlearning meditation, impasses and calm spaces. What I'd like to do is, Jason, if you're willing, bring you back to talk more in depth around things having to do with absorption, samadhi, and multiple meditative processes. In particular, your theory of the meditative process. So I hope you'll come back and speak with us again.
Yes, I'd love to.
That would be terrific. People can find you and more about what you're doing on the website, www.skillfulmeditation.org. For people listening to the podcast, the book that we've been speaking about is Unlearning Meditation, What to Do When the Instructions Get in the Way, by Jason Siff. Jason, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Ted.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on the Secular Buddhist.